keeping you up to speed on all your Colorado teams. It's time for Coffee Break.
Happy Monday, everybody. Another beautiful start to the week in a Mile High City. Welcome in to Coffee Break on a Merilatt Monday as a segue into my every Monday guest, James Merilatt. James, how are you, man?
I'm great, Richie. I'm great. It's not really nice out today, though. It's cold and crappy.
Yeah, but you know what warms the hearts is that we've got a football team here in town that's doing some things.
We do.
Every Monday, regardless of what Mother Nature decides to do, is a beautiful Monday when you've got a team in postseason contention like we do here in Denver. And although the Broncos are on the way up, we did get to witness last night the clinching of the AFC West division for a 9th consecutive time with the divisional doink, as I've dubbed it. The Chiefs clinched their 9th consecutive AFC West title by beating the Chargers and helping the Broncos, arguably, in the process, kind of muddying things up. But it's hard to look at a team that wins a division 9 straight times and not think that in and of itself is dynastic in some way.
It's amazing. And, you know, I kind of knew it, right? Like, it's like, yeah, Chiefs again. Broncos haven't been there since they won the Super Bowl. Like, you kind of knew all those things, but when you hear it, 9 straight, like for almost an entire decade, they've won the division. And I've been a Broncos fan for more than half a century. There were some great Raiders teams in there back in the 70s. You know, the Chargers had some runs with Eric Coryell, some great Broncos runs. Nobody's come close to 9 straight. The Chiefs back in the day with Hank Stram, like 9 in a row is so hard to do. It just shows you how down the Broncos have been, Raiders, the Chargers, and how good the Chiefs have been. It takes that, you know, confluence of factors for this to happen.
Yeah,
I do think they're a fraud, though. I do.
So I'm glad you said that because we looked at the 4-year stretch with Peyton Manning where they won 4 straight AFC West titles, and that was one of the best stretches of Broncos football of all time. I know they went to back-to-back Super Bowls, but you know, outside of that, we're talking about a serious run. Now just double that plus some, and they haven't been a divisional winner, you know, that's gone to the wild card round or gone through the divisional round and lost every year. They backed it up with 3 Super Bowls and other appearances since then. So the Chiefs are where they are and they've done what they've done, but I'll say this, I agree with you. This Chiefs team's getting got this year.
Without a doubt.
They are, and I'm ready. I'm ready because I've been hesitant on it. I've been pseudo James Merilatt with Bo Nix. I've been like hesitant to go here because I've said on record multiple times, and I still believe it, that if it's my money coming out of my pocket, I'm not betting it against Patrick Mahomes. Definitely not in a postseason ever because I've been on the wrong side of it too many times. But you can old takes exposed me right here, right now on, what is it, December 9th? 2024. This Kansas City Chiefs team is getting got. I'm not going to say it's going to happen in the first round. I'm not going to say it's going to happen at any specific point. It might happen in the Super Bowl. They might lose in the Super Bowl. They are not going to hoist the Lombardi this year.
I agree with you. Now, I think they had a fortunate break yesterday with the Rams beating the Bills. Now they have a 2-game lead. They're going to get the bye. So they only got to win 2 home games to get back to a Super Bowl to have a chance to win 3 straight. But I don't think they're going to do it. I mean, they talk about living dangerously. I mean,
it's not just luck anymore. I mean, it's not just putting yourself in a position to be lucky. There are just fortuitous breaks that they're
week
catching.
After week.
The goalpost in an NFL game is the width of a dollar bill.
Yeah.
And you got to hit that thing at a very specific angle for it to ricochet in mid-rotation, by the way.
Yeah.
At any point in the football for it to kick that way, and it did. The beating the Broncos, blowing up Alex Forsythe, that's scheming and execution and putting yourself in a position to catch a break. The doink with a backup kicker for a game that has massive implications on them being able to lock down a first-round bye and have nothing to play for at the end of the season and take a little rest, that's luck.
It was totally luck. Now, it was good for the Broncos. It really was. The Chiefs were winning the division anyway. The Broncos weren't, so who cares? But, you know, and I've run this theory by some folks. And I'm not a believer in this team yet. I got to see him beat somebody that's good. Again, 29-67. I got to update those numbers because some teams lost again yesterday. But there's a path for this team to get to the Super Bowl that was aided last night. It was because the Broncos need to get to the 5. If you can get to the 5, You open in Houston. That's a winnable first-round game. And the 6 and the 7 are the Chargers and the Ravens, two teams who can go on the road and do some damage and knock off the likes of Buffalo, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, and do you some help. It was good news for the Broncos yesterday by and large.
It was. You've got now sitting around that 8-5, you got the muddy middle with Baltimore, LA, and Denver, and it's going to come down to who's going to be able to win more games coming out of the stretch. And I think that's an area where the Broncos, although they have to go head to head with LA again during that stretch.
Oh, that bye or that flex.
Yeah, you had to do it. You had to
worse
flex.
And worse.
You had to flex. I just, again,
we knew it at the time. We talked about it the day they did it.
Yep. I'm not going to get back on the soapbox about that. I thought it was dumb. If they win and it works out, great. Still one of those things where I'm walking away from the blackjack table like, wow, that was a dumb bet.
Yeah.
But I hit.
Yeah.
You know? So I mean, listen, it's a little unfamiliar to be in the position that we're in, but we are really talking about this Colts game this weekend, essentially for all intents and purposes, because nothing's mathematical until it's locked in, but for all intents and purposes, the Broncos are playing for a wild card berth this weekend against a team they're going to be favored against, and that realistically on both sides of the ball, they're better than.
Yeah. That's without. There'll be 3 games to go after that. Then you'll be playing for seeding with the chance to get to that 5 seed. If you can win out, you're going to have a Bengals team, and nothing to play for.
Again, we talked about this when I laid out my thing about I think the Broncos got 1 loss left on their schedule, and the Bengals game was a coin flip about whether or not based on where they're going to be. And if they shut it down, I think that's certainly a situation where unless you stumble a la CU Kansas and just trip over yourself, that's a win. And the Bills losing and the Chiefs having another stroke of luck is widening that gap, increases the likelihood that they have less to play for in week 18 and allows the Broncos to maybe have a chance at a 5-6 seed spot to make some noise if they can beat like a Houston team.
Well, and you need to avoid the 7 because you don't want to go to Buffalo in the opening round.
What a buzzsaw.
6 would likely be Pittsburgh. That would the NFL would love that.
Cinema.
But the 5 is what you want. You want to go to Houston. And look, I feel good about it. The part of me though that remembers last year, Christmas Eve, all you had to do was beat Brayley Zappi and a bad Patriots team, and you're in control of your own playoff destiny, and they couldn't do it. They lose on a field goal at the gun. So you never know in the NFL.
I think that actually marks like 2 years in a row that the Broncos have had a pretty significant serving of coal on Christmas Eve. Because you're right. There was the Bailey Zappi led, hopeless Patriots. And then before that, you had the Christmas massacre
debacle
with the Rams coming to town. And what was it, like 52-13 or something?
It was 51-14,
51-14. And it
was
led
out there. It was all the coaches allegedly having a little too much fun on Christmas Eve.
Yep.
It was, shouting matches on the
Dalton
sidelines.
Reisner, I think. And then you had Nathaniel Hackett obviously fired the next day. It was like the first in-season firing that late in the season for a coach in like a significant stretch of time.
And we had the 2 weeks of Jer Bear. I mean, just think about how far, honestly, the two big teams in town, how far they've come in 2 years. The Broncos 2 years ago, that was their mess. And the Buffs 2 years ago were 1-11.
Yep.
Now they're playing in a bowl game, probable Heisman Trophy winner. Broncos control their own destiny with 4 games to go. They win on Sunday. They're pretty much in. Remarkable turnaround.
Speaking of the Buffs, I'm glad you brought that up because we now know the bowl schedule. We've got it all released, both the college football playoff and the bowl schedule. We know the Buffs are going to be one of the non-playoff teams playing in the Alamo Bowl against a familiar opponent in BYU. And while I still maintain that I'm not thrilled with that matchup, if you look at some of these matchups up here, there's only like 4, maybe 5 games that pique my interest in it at all. I think the Birmingham Bowl could be interesting. I think you've got the Alamo Bowl, obviously, the Arizona Bowl, the Las Vegas Bowl, which the most interesting thing outside of the matchup, which I think could be a good game there with USC and Texas A&M, is that it's the Snoop Dogg Las Vegas Bowl presented by Gin and Juice by Dre and Snoop. That has got to be the longest. I'm honestly proud. My most proud accomplishment of this entire show is that I actually said that without messing it up. I was reciting it in my head before the cameras went on.
Look, I for a long time I've hated bowl season. Most of the games mean absolutely nothing. they back in the day when they didn't have a playoff of any sort, and it was okay, number 1 Colorado is in the Orange Bowl, number 2 Georgia Tech's in this bowl, and you had to see how they could do, and then there'd be voting at the end. They somewhat mattered. Bowl games have been just completely meaningless, just irrelevant for a couple of decades. They're a vestige of the past. They're like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade.
Yep, I'm not a fan.
Time to move on. It's 2024. We have different forms of entertainment than floats drifting down Broadway. It's silly.
I feel like with the bowls too, it used to be like a, hey, well, yes, you're playing for pride, right? Well, then that kind of wore off because the sport in itself just became a little bit more corporate, a little more business. Well, then it shifted to it's a money grab for some of these schools and for some of these companies. Well, the more and more that it's been strung out and the more that it's been diluted because we just keep adding meaningless things. It's gotten to a point now where a lot of these are break evens or somewhat losses from a financial standpoint, not an exposure standpoint for a lot of these schools. So unless you're going to the Bahamas Bowl or the Hawaii Bowl where you can maybe just bake a team vacation into it.
Right.
I mean, what is the point?
And it's a total money grab from the bowls do it because they want the TV money, which I understand. The networks want the programming. ESPN needs something to put on this time of year. And it's, December 27th and they got a game on at noon. But they're completely meaningless.
I do think it damages the prestige and the allure of what they used to be more and more every year. Because listen, I understand that like some of them are meaningless, right, in today's day and age. But I think from a player standpoint, from a coaching standpoint, especially if you weren't going to go pro, right? If you're not one of those thousands and thousands of kids every year that doesn't get selected in the draft. An opportunity to play in the Rose Bowl or to be in the Cotton Bowl or the Sugar Bowl, the Peach Bowl. Now, a lot of those are, even when they were 4-team college ball playoff, those New Year's 6 bowls meant something more than the rest.
Yeah.
I can see playing in those. But why in the world do I care about playing in the ReliaQuest Bowl or the Tony the Tiger Bowl? They
become comical. They become silly. Yeah, and they really have. Now, look, since Shadur and Travis are reportedly going to play for the Buffs,
that's the reason to watch.
It makes the game interesting.
Send off to 2 of the better players.
Yep.
One of the better quarterbacks in CU history, even though he's only here for a short time. I agree. I just was, trying to be respectful. And the best player in college football, and maybe one of the best players that will ever put on a Buff uniform from an individual standpoint.
It's a Saturday game. It's San Antonio, which is a reasonable trip, and I know Coach Prime was hoping the Buffs would play somewhere that was close enough that fans could go to it. Like the fact that those 2 players are playing, as a Buffs fan, it makes me go, maybe. If it was a normal bowl game where the stars were like, hey, time to start getting ready for the combine, I'm out, I would have absolutely zero interest in it. Heck, next year, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when going to a bowl game is kind of hopefully a regular thing for CU, I won't care. Look, the playoff and seeing the bracket, that's great. It's fantastic. They nailed it. I love a lot of the matchups. I love the fact that SMU gets in and Alabama doesn't.
I was going to say,
how awesome is that as an SMU guy? I'm excited.
That's right.
So
early education at SMU.
That part was very cool. But the bowl games are the NIT at this point.
Yep.
They're a total joke.
To your point, I mean, you actually did spend a couple of years at SMU, which is more of a tie than I have to Arizona State, who I'm kind of just choosing is going to be the team that I will pull for in this bracket because I have no major dog, in the fight. But yeah, if you were to told me before the start of the season that we were going to have an expanded college football playoff bracket, and Alabama was not going to be included in it, but the Arizona State Sun Devils, who were picked to finish last in their conference, were going to get a bye alongside Boise State in the Mountain West, I would have given you any possible thing you could have asked me to wager. I would have given it to you. And as someone who I'm not full-blown SEC hater like a lot of people are, I really enjoy LSU. I like watching the Tigers. And I've kind of had an affinity for that school even when I was in college.
Yeah.
So I'm not full-blown SEC hater like I think a lot of people like to just pile up on. To me, that comes across like a little small man syndrome because you don't have a school in the SEC or, whatever, or even the Big Ten. But I'm not losing any sleep over Alabama missing it. I watched the Georgia Bulldogs lose one game in 2 years and not make the college football playoff as if they're not one of the 4 best teams. Alabama as a 3-loss team, who, by the way, because I've seen Nick Saban and Kalen DeBoer and some of those other, SEC pundits talk about like, well, this is going to impact how we handle non-conference scheduling. Well, just as a reminder, all 3 of Alabama's losses were in conference.
Yeah.
And if you look at their non-conference schedule, it was one of the weakest in the country.
They played Mercer toward the end of the year. So, look, I'm not an SEC hater. I'm not. What I'm a hater of is the fact that at the beginning of the season, for the better part of the last 10 years, you and I could have predicted who was going to be in the 4-team college football playoff and probably gone at least 3 for 4, right? You always knew it was Alabama, Georgia, LSU, either Ohio State or Michigan. Like, it was the same people over and over and over again. Maybe Notre Dame had an outside chance of getting in. Maybe Clemson had, like, it was always the same schools. It was boring. The fact now that you're an Arizona State fan,
forks up,
your team can be ranked dead last in the preseason rankings in the conference and end up with a bye in the playoff. I think that's great for college football. I think the more parity, there's a reason the NFL is the big dog, and a lot of it's fantasy football, a lot of it's gambling, a lot of us hate it. They play it once a week, but it's also every team thinks they have a shot for the most part. Parity sells. College football didn't have it. It does now, and nothing speaks to that more than the team ranked dead last in the Big 12 getting a bye in the college football playoff. Because nobody knows anything going into the season. With NIL and with the transfer portal, none of us know anything about these teams.
And for the record, just to stick one more nail in the Crimson Tide coffin, is you mentioned Mercer. They played Western Kentucky. They played 2 Group of 5 schools and 1 Power 4 school who was the 5-7 Wisconsin Badgers, who finished 12th in the expanded Big Ten.
Yeah.
So I actually think the sad thing is the argument should be, and I think this is good for the fans and good for college football, is the argument actually now should be to schedule better non-conference games, because a good non-conference loss can mean more than a meaningless win. When you're talking about a subjective college football playoff committee.
Beating Mercer should do you nothing good when it comes to the rankings.
Nothing. It doesn't help your strength of schedule. And when it comes down to tiebreakers, that hurts you in a situation when you're a 2-loss or a 3-loss SEC team trying to make it in.
Well, and I just don't feel bad for the team that's 13th, 14th, 15th, right? Like, you had to get into the top 12. And I know ranking-wise it's different, but essentially you had to get into the top 12. It's kind of like the team that gets left out of the NCAA tournament. You're the 69th best team in the nation.
Right.
I don't feel sorry for you.
It's a big dance. If you can't make it into that, and I will say this, because you mentioned it with the NFL. I actually think, and this is a somewhat concern that I have, just like we talked about the continued expansion of the bowl games diluted the product and it made it worse. I actually do think there is a tipping point or a point of no return when it comes to, because you're already seeing people say like, well, this is what a 16-team playoff would have looked like. And how cool would that be? Because this team got to come in Miami and Alabama and all that. And then you're like, well, what if we just did 24 and you had this or you eventually there is going to be a point where it's oversaturation in terms of the it's too many games, because it's not basketball where you can turn around and play a couple games in a couple of days. Football is a violent sport. And when you're used to playing 1 game a week, you either got to stretch this thing out way further than you want. And to a certain degree, it makes it too much of a gauntlet. But I do think something that could hurt that is that I think eventually, I know we saw the sacrifice of the Pac-12 for all intents and purposes and the reduction from the Power 5 to the Power 4. I think we're headed to the Big 2. I think we're going to see an AFC, NFC style college setup where you've got the SEC and the Big 10, regardless of whether they keep those names, 2 super conferences, whether they've broken away from the NCAA, one has, one hasn't, whatever it is. I think you're headed to, we've already got an 18-team Big 10, I
think you're heading toward either 2 or you're headed toward 3, right? You're going to have 3 16-team conferences. You got 48 schools. I would love to see it. They'll never do this, but the ideal thing would be you have relegation as a part of that.
That is my favorite hypothetical for college football.
It would be amazing. I think they're pretty close with the playoff at 12. If they had 48 teams that were in the, Class A, whatever you want to call it, Division 1, and you had 16-team playoff, essentially it's the same bracket, just no buys. Not that much different. I think you get beyond 16, it's silly. But if you had 48 teams and the top 16 got in, you have to be in the top third of the top teams to make the playoffs. It makes the regular season better. It makes all of college football better.
I am not a soccer guy by any means. But one thing I do think that European football and those international leagues does right is the concept of relegation, because I think this would have been fascinating even in like the BCS era and other things, because like Boise State was like the BCS darling team. They would go undefeated every year, but their strength of schedule and stuff, they would always get left out in the BCS polling. And if you had a situation like this where like there are just in certain conferences, there are bottom feeder schools. I mean, it's not as much this year, but for a significant stretch of time, Vanderbilt was like the stepchild of the SEC that just got pelted every single year in conference. And if you had a situation where, and this frankly would have impacted the Buffs and likely changed the trajectory of their whole situation.
They would have been out.
The Buffs would have been relegated, and CSU would have been relegated, and all that. And just you had UCF, right? That I think was a fun story for a minute, and then I think they just took it to a point where it pissed a lot of people off, including me, where they started claiming themselves to be the
national
transitive property national champions and printing banners and having a parade and all that stuff. But like, sure, a team like UCF or a team like Boise State or somebody that's in a non-power conference that's dominating, and it's like, okay, let's see what they would do against the big boys, and that would be an opportunity to do it, and you would force other teams in that middle of the pack and bottom of those other conferences to schedule and play a lot differently.
Well, it'll be interesting when there will be a form of it, at least initially, when they do form the super conferences and we do figure out, all right, here's the elite schools, because at some point, if you're an SEC team, why are you sharing the TV money with Vanderbilt?
Right.
If you're a Big Ten team, why are you sharing
Ohio
TV
State,
money with Northwestern?
Yeah, Ohio State, who by and large, and Michigan to a certain degree has just won in recent years too. But Ohio State, you look at every big noon kickoff is Ohio State versus somebody.
And so those schools aren't bringing anything to the table. You have to have other teams in your conference. You're a Michigan State guy.
Yep.
Michigan State brings, like, they're not the elite of that conference year in and year out, but they bring something to it in terms of like, hey, you got to have some competitive opponents to make for good TV matchups. Northwestern doesn't bring that.
Right.
Vanderbilt doesn't bring that.
Right.
Rutgers doesn't bring that. Those schools are going to get left out. So there will be a form of relegation when they finally do get it right. I just wish somebody was in charge and could say, let's just build this thing correctly. Like, we have a chance here with transfer portal and NIL and everything else to reinvent college football. Do it right. It would be so fascinating if they would. They will not. They'll screw it up. Screw it up.
No, yeah, it's proven to be kind of a listless ship at times, and it's always pointed toward money, but that money doesn't always go where it should go, and we'll see. But I do think that we are far from seeing the end of the tweaks and things in college football, and I do want to make sure that I take a moment just to, which I think is because it's like one of my favorite traditions in Denver, to point out once again the absurdity, the ridiculousness, the superhuman nature that is Nikola Jokic. And I know that sitting at 12-10, they're not record-wise where we want them to be, where they want to be, and where they're going to need to be if Nikola Jokic is going to be in contention for another MVP, which is sad because statistically, there's no doubt. Look at the stats from the last 24 hours. 104 points, 30 rebounds, 16 assists. Oh, by the way, on back-to-back road games, dropping 48 points on the heels of a 56-point performance the night before on the road is obscene.
It's crazy. It also, like, we live in a day and age where playing a back-to-back's like this big thing, and back-to-back on the road, and
only if you're Joel Embiid.
I mean, it's silly. So kudos that he was able to play on back-to-back nights. But yeah, the numbers he put up were obscene. The game they lost though at Washington, the start of the fourth quarter, it went on like for 4 or 5 minutes. The lineup Michael Malone played, it was as though he was protesting. I don't know if you remember back in the day, the Lakers played a playoff game against the Suns. Kobe was playing. His teammates weren't particularly good. People were complaining that he was shooting too much. So he just decided, okay, I won't shoot the ball. And they lose by 35 or whatever, right?
Something only a player like Kobe Bryant could get away with.
Right. He makes his point. I think it was the fourth game. They wound up getting swept. It didn't matter. I feel like Michael Malone was sending that kind of message to Calvin Booth of like, look at the groceries you've given me. What on earth am I supposed to do here when the second best player on the floor, it was Michael Porter Jr. That was the best player on the floor. It was Strother. It was Tyson. I mean, it was just like this crazy lineup of a bunch of guys. Like, how on earth they would be the worst team in the NBA if that was their five. DeAndre Jordan was out there for a long period of time.
Yep.
I really think Michael Malone was protesting at that point.
It's possible, but the sad thing is, if anybody should be protesting, it's actually it's less impactful, and it shouldn't be Michael Malone, because you're supposed to be in lockstep with your GM and your organization and all that.
They aren't.
It's a two-way street there. You can't blame it all on one side. If anybody should be protesting, it should be freaking Nikola. It should every year since Nikola Jokic won his first MVP. The first year he won it, he had one of the most efficient seasons from a PER standpoint. Statistically, it was improbable for him to be able to improve on that pace year after year. And he has. He's gotten more efficient. His numbers have gotten better, averaging triple doubles as the center, leading the league in assists, for stretches of the season. And 3 times in a row, and including the one that he should have won that was given to Joel Embiid. This year, he's finding ways to continue to build on that number. And it's just, if anybody's going to protest, it should be him saying, how can I be doing this? He's like Joe Burrow on the Bengals right now.
Yeah.
Like, he's having one of the most unbelievable years from an individual standpoint at the most important position for that team based on the way that they're structured. And it's a coin flip about whether or not they're going to win.
It's teetering on the part of, we really do need to start having the conversation of, are they going to waste Nikola Jokic's prime?
100%.
Because this year is going in a bad direction. The Jamal Murray situation seems to be getting worse and worse and worse. And that probably is not going away anytime soon. And what do they do? Like, it's amazing, a couple of years removed from a championship, how disjointed this team seems. Part of what they did back then, and I'm stealing this from Zach By, was, if you're a basketball fan, like, you had to be a Nuggets fan because they played basketball the right way. They were a joy to watch. The extra pass, all the rest of it.
It was like watching the Golden State Warriors pre-Kevin Durant. It was like
they're
poetry.
Not that anymore. And it's like, how do you get that back? And look, maybe they're 22 games in. Maybe they can fix it. But if not, shame on Calvin Booth, shame on Michael Malone, shame on Josh Kroenke to let it get to this situation. I never think a franchise or a professional sports team needs to lose money. I think that's unfair. It's a business. But I do think in short windows, when you have the best player in franchise history and the best player on the planet, you need to push all your chips in and do everything you can to maximize that and to make sure you win. And the Nuggets just haven't done it. And it's a shame. And you talk about a protest from Nikola Jokic. At some point, was it going to shock you when he just doesn't come back from Serbia?
Maybe not. Horse racing's never going to go away, and he's got enough money and things and opportunities in his life to do whatever he wants. He's a very strong family man, and there may be a point where he doesn't need to do this anymore. He can just watch his kids grow up and go back home to Serbia and do all that stuff. And I pray, like we all do, that we get to enjoy him for as long as we have him. But you're right. This cake's already been put in the oven for the Nuggets. The groceries have been fought, the batter's been mixed, and that cake's baking. You got these 4 and you locked it in, and you battled the apron battle, and all that to do that. So this is what you got, and they got to figure it out. And I saw Mel and some of our other commenters commenting on the Avs, been, not hesitant to hammer them. And we had similar conversations about, are you going to waste the prime years of your core with McKinnon and Makar and Mikko and all that? They've had a couple of better goaltending games, including, from Georgiev. It wasn't just Wedgie. But we hear Mel and everybody else out there just commenting. Here's where I'm at with that. Great. I love it, but we need to see a lot more of it before we're just going to start getting excited every time one of the goaltenders on a championship contending team does what they're supposed to do, in a certain sense. So happy for it, excited, but I'm still a little jaded from some of that. And I don't think that Georgie and Wedgwood could go undefeated in their next 6 or 7 starts each. And I still think they need to make a move for a goaltender.
What I want to see is, I want to get off the roller coaster.
Yeah.
Right? Like, people get all excited when they have a great game. I'd rather see you give up 2 goals every night, because that's their formula for success. Right? It's just give me the
win games 4-2.
Consistently fine. Don't give me a great and then awful and great and then awful and then great. Like, that's all over the board. Just be consistently a 5, and this team will be fine. I don't know that either one of them can do it, but I think we all saw Wedgie's a backup for a reason.
Yeah, he's been that way for nearly a decade in the
Yeah.
NHL, and you're not going to, as much as we'd like to say it, how great of a story it would be, you're not going to change that. That's not going to be like a
No.
Rich Gannon situation,
No.
where everything's perfect around you. All right. On the way out, I wasn't going to do it, but it's so timely and it's so fresh. I don't even want to push it to later in the week. In a little bit of a get off my chest kind of moment here, get off my lawn kind of moment. Did you see the breaking baseball news with Juan Soto?
I did.
$765 million over 15 years. He goes down the street to the New York Mets. A couple things here. One, baseball money is absurd.
It's ridiculous.
This is crazy. And listen, it's not so much that I bought into it, but I think I understood it more with the Ohtani situation when he had the unbelievable $700 million contract with all the deferment and all that, which is going to be another part of my get off my lawn thing here. Because Ohtani is a generational type player that plays both ways, and he's generational at both of them.
Yeah.
He's
Travis Hunter.
He's the superhuman version of Travis Hunter.
Yeah.
And I mean, even though the Dodgers smartly only had him batting, they only had him playing one way this season, even playing one way with an injured shoulder, he was ripping dingers with basically one arm.
Yeah.
I mean, when he's running the baseline with his arm kind of tucked up here and all that stuff, and he was still just unbelievable. So I understood it, even if I wasn't fully on board with that kind of insane amount of money for, again, a sport that is at best third in popularity among the four major sports by and large. As much as we all love it, it's America's pastime and whatnot. Juan Soto's not worth $65 million more than Shohei Ohtani. He's just not. And I'm going to say this too, and this might be a little bit get off my lawny. The Yankees, per John Heyman, the Yankees offered Soto $760 million over 16 years. So they offered him $5 million less in total, spread out over one extra year. And he turned it down. What a slap in the face that is. And I get it. The Yankees were just in the World Series, and you've got Judge there, and they've still got Stanton, and there's a lot of players on that team. So if you want to be Jeremy Grant, you want to be the star, you go from the, whatever. But this was a 24-year-old kid who was playing for a marquee franchise in all of sports. There's the LA Lakers, there's the Boston Celtics, there's, I guess, the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah.
And the New York Yankees are one of those teams that it means something, regardless of the era you came up in it. When somebody's wearing the starting pitcher comes out in those pinstripes in New York City, that's something. And I know that they haven't been able to get over that mountaintop, and they have the most World Series ever, but it's been a minute. You had an opportunity to be the cornerstone of that franchise. You could have handed it off, taken the mantle from Judge and all of that. And it's one thing if you're going to do that to go be Kevin Durant. You're going to take it and you're going to go to the Dodgers, right? The team that just beat you, and you're okay. Hey, fine. You want to get a ring. You want to lock it in and that amount but it's the equivalent of like $4.5 million a year spread out over 15 years that you said no to the Yankees to go to the next door neighbor. That's a punk move.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a lot of it that, look, good for him, right? He got his money. There's no way that contract ages well. No way.
None of them will.
No way.
The only one, I guess, in theory that has a chance is Shohei's because of the deferment, because you're going to pay him $2 million a year for X amount of years. Then you're going to cut him for 10 years. Then you're going to cut a $680 million check on the back end. So you say, hey, we got a decade of the best player in baseball at the cheapest contract in baseball, and we'll pay for our sins. We'll be in cap hell, kind of thing after that. But no one is going to be looking at Juan Soto 11 years into his 15-year contract. Like, yep, he's still worth that.
Well, and it's just the prime example of how broken the sport is, right? He's going to make as much per year as some teams' entire payroll.
Yeah. And that's another thing too, by the way. If Juan Soto was playing for a bottom feeder small market team and he left them to go be with the Mets, That's fine. Okay, hey, you took your chance, but
the Rockies and other teams like the Rockies, you're essentially the Washington Generals playing the Globetrotters.
Yep.
You're just an opponent.
Yep.
They got to have somebody on the other side of the diamond in the other dugout, and you're just there to get beat up on. And at some point, and I know everybody loves going out of Coors Field. It's a thing to do during the summer. But at some point, like, why are you paying for that? Why? Like, and that's I've gotten to that point with the Rockies. Like, I'm just not gonna participate in it. And it's just like, man, you got no chance. And I know there's always, the Royals 1-1, and you get a stretch where the A's are competitive and the Twins are competitive.
Yeah, money ball.
It's the big teams that are there every single year who have a chance to win it every single year. It's a broken sport. It's pointless. And at some point, and it's already kind of turned into this, it's a very regional sport. It's popular in LA, New York, Boston, Chicago.
Yeah.
Not
teams that aren't major NFL markets.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're going to kill the golden goose and stuff like this is what's going to do
I'm glad you mentioned the Rockies, and I'll give a little tip of the cap to our guy, Jake Shapiro here, who I saw put this stat out there. Juan Soto's contract is worth more than 50% of the most recent valuation of the Colorado Rockies. They're about a $1.4 billion franchise. And Juan Soto by himself over the next 15 years is worth more than half of that entire franchise. So let alone the payroll that they get to spend on his yearly contract. It's just Robert Kraft bought the Patriots for $172 million. And they've won 6 Super Bowls in the last, 20 years.
Yeah, the money has just gotten nuts. We've been saying that, though. Richie, I remember calling in and being on the radio when John Elway signed a contract for $1 million a year. I was a little kid calling in, right? And people thought that was crazy, and the money's gotten ridiculous. Like, we're always going to say that, but at some point, there is a tipping point.
We're inside of 5 years of a baseball player signing a 10+ year contract that starts with a B. We're within 5 years, we will have a baseball player sign $1 billion
for a
contract.
Sport that if we went to the 16th Street Mall and said, hey, who was in the World Series this year? And it was the Yankees and the Dodgers. How many people would get that answer right out of 10?
It's so funny you say that. And I know we got to wrap, so I'll close with this. I was literally having this conversation down the hall with someone in this building, and I was arguing the Juan Soto thing with them. And he goes, well, the Mets have been in the World Series more recently than the Yankees. And I was like, you mean like literally this past World Series that happened a couple of months ago? Literally 2 months ago? That's why this is. And he was like, oh, I guess you're right. And I was like, man,
and that's a major sports fan.
Yep.
Right. It's a big time sports fan. And he doesn't know.
Yeah, this particular individual is a massive sports fan.
The average person doesn't follow baseball, doesn't care about baseball. I don't know how this is going to age in terms of I know how it's going to age in terms of his ability to live up to the contract on the field. It's going to age poorly, but just economically, I don't know how baseball can do it. I don't see this as sustainable. I really don't.
It's not. And I think that, we will see changes and tweaks made by Rob Manfred, and at the organizational level, the owners and stuff will get together and do some things. But similarly to how we've had conversations about college football in the NIL transfer portal era, being like, hey, we got to rein this in a little bit. It's going to be too much of the Wild West. I think baseball is going to have to face a similar conflict when it comes to the amount of money that they're shelling out and the way that it's distributed, plus all this deferment stuff, which is just destined to bite a team at some point. And I don't know. I can't say that I'm a huge fan of it, but I will definitely be invested in watching how it plays out. And I'm excited that the Broncos are back from the bye, and we get to look ahead to Indianapolis. And man, every time I say it, it's not lost on me that for the better part of the last decade, we've been not even remotely close to having conversations like this in terms of looking at genuine postseason potential with 4 to 5 weeks left in the season. We're looking at, hey, just snipe off a win, maybe 2, and you're in. And that's where we're at. So we'll be locked in for you, breaking it all down each and every day here on Coffee Break live at noon. Be sure on the way out, give us a follow on all of our social media channels at Denver Sports.com. So much great content going up on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever we need to call it. So much at your fingertips, at your disposal from all of our great digital and on-air talent each and every day. And we'll be back again tomorrow to break it all down. Have a good rest of your day.